I used to believe that if I loved deeply enough, gratitude would naturally follow. But that illusion shattered the moment I heard my son Colin whisper to his wife, "Finally, the old woman sent the money." Unaware I was still on the line, in that heartbreaking instant, 60 years of maternal devotion crumbled like dust beneath my feet, leaving nothing but the bitter taste of betrayal. For decades, I had been Colin's safety net, bailing him out of gambling debts, financing his lavish wedding to Vanessa, and providing the down payment for their apartment. I gave until my accounts ran dry, all while telling myself that someday he would appreciate my sacrifices. But that day never came. Instead, my generosity only taught him that I was nothing more than an ATM with a pulse. The depth of their treachery became clear when I discovered they had taken out a substantial life insurance policy on me without my knowledge. Their scheme was terrifyingly simple: lure me on a hiking trip to a remote state park known for treacherous cliffs and unfortunate accidents, then collect their payday. What they didn't account for was that their frail 60-something mother was an experienced member of a local mountaineering club with wilderness survival training. The cruelty escalated when Colin disposed of Goofy, my loyal companion of 12 years, calling him just an old dog and dismissing my pain with callous indifference. That was the moment my heart finally hardened. Some wounds cut too deep for forgiveness, and in that instant, I knew there would be no redemption for the child I had raised. When they proposed the hiking trip, I played along perfectly. I pretended to drink their drugged water while offering them energy bars I had laced with their own sedatives. As they lay unconscious on the mountain trail, I experienced not satisfaction but a hollow vindication. The tables had turned, but victory tasted far more bitter than sweet. Fate has a peculiar sense of timing. While descending the mountain, I discovered Leonard Graham, an injured hiker who happened to be the executive director of the very firm Colin's company had been desperately courting. In saving Leonard's life, I unwittingly sealed Colin's professional demise. Sometimes karma needs no orchestration. It simply arrives when accounts must be settled. Upon their return from the mountain, Colin and Vanessa's health began deteriorating, the result of years of indulgent, unhealthy meals I had deliberately prepared. Knowing their effects, when they attempted to claim ownership of my house with a document they hadn't bothered to read properly, I revealed the truth. Colin wasn't even my biological son. I had raised him after his biological mother, the woman who destroyed my marriage, abandoned him. Despite giving him everything, he had repaid me with only greed and contempt. As I closed the door on their sobbing figures, I felt no triumph, only release. The weight of maternal obligation lifted from my shoulders like a heavy cloak I'd worn for decades. In its place grew something unfamiliar, yet precious, the freedom to live for myself. Leonard's quiet presence became a balm for my wounded spirit. Unlike the consuming, thankless relationship with Colin, my connection with Leonard blossomed slowly, built on mutual respect rather than obligation. We didn't speak of grand romance or forever. Instead, we shared morning walks, pottery classes, and the simple pleasure of sitting together as twilight descended. Standing at 60 years old, I finally understand that love without boundaries isn't love at all, it's servitude. True love respects both giver and receiver, nurturing growth rather than enabling destruction. As Leonard gently asked if I might fall in love again, I realized with quiet certainty that perhaps I already had, not just with him, but with the woman I was becoming, finally free to write my own story. I just wired $330,000 to your account, I told my son Colin over the phone, my voice warm with maternal affection. Little did I know that moments after my declaration, when he thought I'd hung up, I would hear the words that would shatter my world. Finally, the old woman sent the money. It was Vanessa's voice, my daughter-in-law, followed by Colin's dismissive scoff and the revelation that cut deeper than any knife. She's too damn cautious. We had to fake a pregnancy just to get that money. In that moment, every sacrifice I had ever made for my son crystallized into a bitter monument to my own naivety. Colin had always been reckless with money, coming to me for handouts, repeatedly, sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands, even tens of thousands at a time. And I helped him every time, patching up one financial hole after another. When he racked up gambling debts, I was his safety net. When he needed a lavish wedding for Vanessa, I funded it. When they wanted a down payment for their apartment, my savings account provided it. After the wedding, Colin's visits became increasingly rare. Our phone conversations dwindled to brief, perfunctory exchanges. I told myself he was simply busy with married life, creating 1,000 excuses for his absence in my heart. But the truth was far colder. I had never truly mattered in his world, except as a source of financial relief. The deception deepened when Colin and Vanessa suddenly appeared at my doorstep 2 days later, feigning concern for my well-being. Had a free day. Figured I'd drop by and check on you, Colin said breezily, pushing a bag of supplements into my arms. Vanessa quickly chimed in with her perfectly rehearsed smile. Helen, you have no idea. Colin talks about you all the time at home. He's just been so swamped with work. Their true intentions surfaced within minutes of entering my home. So you know Vanessa's pregnant, Colin began, scratching his head with deliberate casualness. The apartment we're in, it's just way too cramped. We were thinking maybe we could move in with you for a while. When I agreed without resistance, their confidence grew. Colin pushed further. Well, since we're going to be living here anyway, maybe it makes sense to put the house in my name. The performance continued as days passed. Vanessa cozied up beside me on the couch, her sugar-sweet smile barely concealing her impatience. Helen, how's the house transfer coming along? When I mentioned it needed a few more days, her smile stiffened momentarily before she recovered with a breezy laugh. That's fine. We're in no rush. From that day forward, their behavior transformed into something disturbingly wholesome. Vanessa began making breakfast for me. Colin, who had never lifted a finger around the house, suddenly offered to clean the kitchen. Every word, every gesture was soaked in artificial sweetness, a perfect portrait of a doting daughter-in-law and considerate son. But I knew better. This was all a carefully orchestrated performance, a waiting game until my signature dried on the transfer documents. One night, unable to sleep, I overheard whispers from the living room. As soon as she signs over the house, Colin said, his voice low and cold, we kick her out. Vanessa giggled with barely contained excitement. Exactly. And by then, all her inheritance should be ours anyway. Then came the words that would finally break whatever maternal illusion I still harbored. My mother. She doesn't mean a damn thing to me. Helen's just dead weight. I've got you now. What do I need her for? The most devastating blow came when they disposed of Goofy, my beloved dog of 12 years. The dog I took him out this morning and dumped him somewhere, Colin admitted with lazy indifference when I discovered my companion missing. It's just an old dog, always getting in the way. Figured the house would be a lot quieter without him. Their cruelty knew no bounds. They had taken out a life insurance policy on me without my knowledge, planning to make my death look like an unfortunate hiking accident. They had faked a pregnancy to extract money from me. They had schemed to take my house and then discard me like yesterday's trash. But what they didn't account for was that I had started seeing through their facade long ago. I had begun planning my own counter-strategy, setting in motion a series of events that would eventually expose their true colors and force them to face the consequences of their deception. As I prepared to turn the tables on the son who saw me as nothing but a stepping stone to wealth, one thought crystallized in my mind sometimes. The people who should love us the most are the ones capable of the deepest betrayal. And sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is recognizing when it's time to cut those toxic ties, even when they're bound by blood. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft stripes across my bedroom as I opened my eyes. Out of habit, I turned to look at the empty rug beside my bed, where Goofy, my loyal companion for 12 years, should have been curled up. That familiar spot where he'd always nudged me awake with his damp nose was eerily vacant. A knot formed in my chest as I sat up and threw off the blanket. "Goofy, come here, sweetheart," I called, clapping my hands as I walked to the doorway. I scanned the living room, checked under the dining table. By the stairs, nothing. In the kitchen, his water bowl by the fridge was still full, which meant he'd been home last night, but his food dish sat empty. A wave of unease rose within me. I stepped into the backyard where the freshly mowed grass glistened with morning dew. "Goofy, come on, this isn't funny." My voice echoed across the stillness, answered only by chirping birds. My fingertips grew cold as dread settled deep in my bones. After searching every room, looking behind the sofa, under beds, in closets, behind bathroom doors, I returned to his corner, that little nook once cluttered with old blankets, toys, and his favorite squeaky ball. Now it was pristine, as if no dog had ever lived there. That's when it hit me. He hadn't wandered off. He'd been taken. Colin and Vanessa sat at the dining table, eating breakfast without a care in the world. Vanessa dragged her manicured nails against her plate, making an irritating scraping sound. I paused, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Colin, have either of you seen Goofy?" My son didn't even look up. He bit into a strip of bacon and waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, the dog I took him out this morning and dumped him somewhere." A deafening roar exploded in my mind. My body hollowed out in a single blow. "You've what?" My voice emerged in broken gasps, nails digging into my palms as I struggled to maintain control. Colin finally glanced up, chewing his food with lazy indifference. "It's just an old dog, always getting in the way. Figured the house would be a lot quieter without him." My ears rang. My stomach churned as if I'd been punched. "You have no idea what he meant to me," I said, my voice shaking, fingertips pale and trembling. He shrugged, completely unfazed. "Come on, Mom, don't make such a big deal out of it. You're 60 years old. What are you doing keeping a dog around anyway? You've wasted 12 years and God knows how much money on that mutt. I did you a favor. Now you don't have to deal with it anymore." I stood speechless, lips quivering, as Vanessa dabbed her mouth with a napkin and added casually, "Honestly, Helen, you should be thanking Colin. He made the right decision for you." And my eyes drifted to the coffee table, where an old faded photo sat me on the couch, holding 1-year-old Goofy in my arms, smiling with a warmth I could still remember vividly. That dog had been my comfort, my companion, my only constant through years of loneliness. and now they had taken him from me without a flicker of remorse. The morning sun poured through the windows, but I had never felt so cold. It was as if my heart had finally caved in, collapsing into a void so dark and deep I couldn't even find the bottom. Colin had hurt me before I'd swallowed the pain and accepted that I'd raised an ungrateful, selfish man. But I never thought the final blow, the one that would truly break me, would come from his casual cruelty toward a defenseless animal who had done nothing but offer unconditional love. In that moment, I understood with painful clarity it was time to cut this farce of a mother-son bond once and for all. This wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't about the house or the inheritance or any material possession. This was about a fundamental lack of humanity, a coldness so profound it couldn't be explained away by anything but the complete absence of empathy. I had spent years making excuses for Colin's behavior. When he threw a bowl of scalding soup in my face after I tried to help him with his gambling addiction, I cleaned up the shattered pieces while my skin blistered, saying nothing. When he drained my accounts for his and Vanessa's extravagant wedding demands, I told myself it was a mother's duty. When I overheard them plotting to kick me out of my own home after tricking me into signing it over, I still held on to a thread of hope that somewhere, deep down, there might be a flicker of genuine feeling. But this casual disposal of a living being who had been my faithful friend for over a decade revealed the truth I had been avoiding. Colin was incapable of love, not just toward me, but toward anything. He viewed the world only in terms of what could be used, exploited, and discarded when no longer convenient. That night, I sat quietly in my room, my heart slowly returning to a state of eerie calm. "Goofy," I whispered to the empty air, "if you were still here, I'd want you to see this, see how they'll pay for their cruelty." And in that moment of perfect clarity, I began to devise a plan, not out of vengeance, but out of justice. A plan that would finally free me from the chains of maternal obligation I had wrapped around myself. A plan that would teach Colin and Vanessa that some actions have consequences that cannot be bought off or talked away. My love had made me blind, but Goofy's absence had finally opened my eyes. While I was tidying the living room, my eyes drifted toward Colin's laptop, left carelessly open on the couch. Its screen still glowed, paused on a browser window. I hadn't intended to snoop. Respect for privacy had always been my principle, even with my own son. But the words on that screen stopped me cold, sending a chill spreading down my spine that settled like ice along my back. How to take out a high-value life insurance policy for an elderly family member. Common methods of going missing without protection. How to reassign a trust fund beneficiary after death. I only managed to read a few lines before the significance hit me with the force of a physical blow. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that my life had been reduced to a dollar amount, a target with a payout. The son I had raised with my own hands, the child I had sacrificed everything for, was methodically planning my death. Perhaps it was fate or mere dumb luck that I happened to glance at that laptop screen. That one accidental glimpse might have just saved my life. Without hesitation, I grabbed my coat and drove straight to the insurance office, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. "Hi, I'd like to check if anyone has taken out a policy under my name," I said to the receptionist, trying to keep my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. The employee typed for a few moments, then nodded as he pulled up a file. "Yes, Miss Dawson, there is indeed a high-value life insurance policy registered under your name premium tier, actually. One of the most expensive plans we offer. I took the document with ice-cold fingers, though I didn't need further proof. I already knew exactly what Colin and Vanessa were planning. To them, I wasn't family. I was a payout waiting to be collected. When I returned home, they were lounging on the couch, the picture of casual innocence. Colin surprisingly stood to greet me, reaching for my bag with that familiar phony warmth he always deployed when he needed something. "Hey, Mom, you must be exhausted from running around today," he said, the dutiful son act firmly in place. I kept my expression carefully unreadable as I sat down, watching them exchange quick glances. "What's all this about?" I asked, noticing their unusual attentiveness. Colin scratched his head, trying to appear casual. "We were thinking maybe we could take you out to the National Forest tomorrow, hike some trails, get some fresh air, change of scenery." Vanessa immediately chimed in, placing a gentle hand on my back. Her voice dripped with contrition that I now recognized as entirely manufactured. "I've been so moody lately, snapping at you for no reason. I'm really sorry. Helen, I thought it might be nice to reset, spend some peaceful time together." I nearly laughed out loud at their performance. If I hadn't already uncovered their plan, I might have actually believed this little charade of affection. The National Forest they mentioned, I'd heard of it before. Every year there were reports of hikers who mysteriously disappeared or accidentally fell from the cliffs. Treacherous terrain, unmonitored trails. The place had earned a reputation among locals, and not a good one. Colin knew exactly what kind of place it was. That's precisely why he chose it. "Sure, sounds nice. I'll go," I said, nodding with deliberate simplicity. They both looked momentarily stunned by how easily I agreed. Vanessa recovered quickly, smiling and ushering me toward my bedroom. "Great. Then you better go start packing. We're leaving early." I didn't respond. I simply went to my room and locked the door behind me. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I stared at the empty backpack, my hands curling slowly into fists. I already knew what they intended to do, but what they didn't know was that I had started planning long before they ever did. The next morning after breakfast, we set off. I sat quietly in the passenger seat of Colin's car, watching the scenery grow increasingly barren as we left the city behind. The farther we drove, the calmer my heart became, calm in a way that felt almost ominous. Colin had chosen a remote state park on the outskirts of town, exactly as I'd expected. "We're here," he announced, pulling up near the base of the mountain. As I stepped out, a sharp chill crept up my spine despite the daylight. Vanessa immediately looped her arm through mine, her voice overly cheerful. "Helen, what are you spacing out for? Come on, don't kill the mood." I offered a warm smile in return. "Of course. We're here to relax today, aren't we?" We began hiking up the steep trail, winding higher and higher until the sun had turned the sky a glowing shade of crimson. When we finally stopped to rest near a scenic overlook, we were just a few steps from the summit. Colin gestured toward a large rock. "Mom, sit down. Take a breather," he said, reaching into his backpack. He pulled out a bottle and handed it to me. "It's an electrolyte drink. Thought it might help you recharge." I took the bottle with a grateful nod and raised it to my lips, just enough to make it look like I was drinking. I never swallowed a drop. As I lowered the bottle, I caught the fleeting glance exchanged between Colin and Vanessa. That smug curl at the corners of their mouths confirmed what I already knew. Perfect. They thought they were the hunters, but little did they know they had become the prey. What they didn't realize was that their frail old mother was actually a longtime member of a local mountaineering club, trained in wilderness first aid, and in better physical shape than most people half her age. I had my own plans for this hiking trip, and unlike theirs, Mine wouldn't end in tragedy, at least. Not for me. Sometimes the predator becomes the prey, and sometimes the prey was never as helpless as it appeared to be. I pulled 2 energy bars from my bag and held them out with a gentle smile. You two should eat something too. It's been a long climb. And Colin and Vanessa took the bars eagerly, tearing into the wrappers without a second thought, so eager. In fact, they didn't even notice the faint tear marks I'd carefully concealed on the packaging. They were too focused on watching me sip the electrolyte drink they'd offered, believing their plan was unfolding perfectly. We sat on the rocks at the scenic overlook, the crimson sun casting long shadows across the mountain trail. I pretended to rest, then allowed my body to go limp, collapsing to the ground exactly as they expected. Through barely open eyes, I heard Vanessa's delighted laugh. She actually drank it. That was way too easy. Colin's voice followed, colder than I'd ever heard it. Sorry, Mom, but I really need that insurance money. I felt them start to drag me toward the edge, likely aiming for a spot off the trail where no one would easily find a body. I counted silently in my head, waiting for the sedatives I'd carefully extracted from their own stash, the very drugs they'd hidden in the house over the past few days, to take effect. The sedatives I'd methodically transferred from their water bottle to the energy bars. Then I heard it, 2 heavy crashes hitting the ground behind me. I opened my eyes and stood up slowly, brushing the dirt off my clothes. They lay unconscious on the ground, victims of their own medicine. You see, I whispered to their motionless forms, I never drank that electrolyte concoction. I only pretended to. The real trick was in the energy bars, laced with the very sedatives you had hidden in the house, trying to trap me. You're far too naive. I shot them one last cold, cutting glance, then slung my backpack over my shoulder and began walking back down the mountain. As night fell, the temperature would drop sharply. Wild animals often wandered these trails. If they didn't find their way back down before dark, well, that would be their lesson to learn. Let them have a taste of real survival for once. I hummed to myself as I descended step by step, feeling neither triumph nor remorse, just a strange, weightless sense of liberation. 60 years of unfailing maternal devotion had led to this moment, and yet I felt nothing but calm detachment. Perhaps that was the final gift Colin had given me, freedom from the burden of unconditional love. Just as I neared the trailhead, I heard faint cries nearby, weak, broken sounds calling for help. I stopped in my tracks, turned toward the sound, and carefully made my way through the brush. There in the undergrowth lay a man, his leg clearly injured, face pale, eyes glassy from pain. He looked to be around my age. Can you call for help? He trembled. I didn't hesitate. I dialed emergency services and stayed by his side until an ambulance arrived. At the hospital, I sat quietly in the waiting room as they wheeled him into the ER. A while later, a doctor emerged. He's going to be okay, out of danger. When he finally regained consciousness, I heard his name clearly for the first time. Thank you, he said softly. I'm Leonard Graham, Executive Director of Graham Group. My heart skipped a beat. The Graham Group, the very firm Colin's company had been desperately trying to secure investment from. How interesting. Fate never forgets its timing. You saved my life, Leonard said, still weak but gripping my hand with surprising strength. If there's ever anything you need, anything at all, just ask. Whatever I can do, I will. I smiled gently and patted the back of his hand. I just happened to be there, doing the right thing doesn't always need a reward. He spoke with such sincerity, but I preferred to keep this unexpected encounter to myself, a quiet twist of fate I'd rather treasure privately. As I rose to leave, I saw the hallway outside his room was already crowded with executives, assistants, and friends, all rushing in to check on him. Even lying in that hospital bed, Leonard carried the calm authority of a man used to commanding a room. He wasn't just another patient. He was someone important. For the first time in a long while, I felt something in my chest loosen, a weight lifted. That night, I slept like a baby. When I woke the next morning, sunlight spilling softly across my pillow, I picked up the phone, dialing with shaky, breathless urgency. "Hello, please. You have to help me. My son and daughter-in-law went hiking at Sable Ridge yesterday. They haven't come back. I'm so worried. Please, please find them." The operator's voice grew serious at once. "Ma'am, stay calm. We're dispatching a search team immediately." 5 hours later, I got the call. "We found them." Gee. I took my time getting to the hospital. When I opened the door to their room, I found Colin and Vanessa lying in their beds, pale and haggard, like a pair of soaked stray cats. Colin turned his head weakly. "Mom, where did you go?" I blinked innocently, keeping my voice soft. "I'm not sure. I just remember waking up in a hospital room." I rolled up my pant leg to reveal a neatly wrapped ankle bandage. "Doctor said it was just a mild sprain," Vanessa gasped, her breath still ragged. We passed out all of a sudden. It doesn't make sense. Did you—" I quickly waved my hand, cutting her off with a look of hurt surprise. "What are you saying? Why would I ever do something like that? I love you both. I've been sick with worry." Colin frowned, as if trying to piece things together, but said nothing. "Forget it," he mumbled finally, flopping back against the pillow in defeat. As I stood there watching them, I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, only a quiet certainty that justice sometimes arrives in unexpected forms. They had plotted my demise on that mountain, but in the end, the mountain had nearly claimed them instead. Sometimes, the tables turn not through elaborate schemes, but through simple reversals of fortune. I had merely returned their medicine to its rightful owners and let nature take its course. And in doing so, I had not only saved myself, but discovered an unexpected new beginning, all because I happened to be in the right place at the right time to help a stranger named Leonard Graham. Just as I neared the trailhead, I suddenly heard faint cries nearby, weak, broken sounds calling for help. I stopped in my tracks, turned toward the sound, and carefully made my way through the brush. The mountain air had grown cooler as evening approached, and something in those desperate calls pulled me forward despite my determination to leave this place behind. There in the undergrowth lay a man, his leg clearly injured, face pale from pain, his eyes, glassy with discomfort, widened slightly as I emerged from between the trees. He looked to be around my age, dressed in expensive hiking gear that had done little to protect him from what appeared to be a serious fall. "Can you call for help?" He trembled, his voice surprisingly dignified even in distress. I didn't hesitate. Despite everything that had just transpired with Colin and Vanessa, despite leaving them unconscious on the mountainside as retribution for their planned treachery, I couldn't simply walk past someone genuinely in need. I dialed emergency services, explained our location with the precision that came from years of hiking experience, and stayed by his side. "Thank you," he managed, wincing as he tried to adjust his position. "I've been here for hours, beginning to think no one would come along." I crouched beside him, using my backpack to elevate his injured leg. What happened? Veered off the main trail to photograph some wildlife. Stepped wrong on loose rocks. He attempted a self-deprecating smile. Amateur mistake for someone who should know better. And while we waited for help to arrive, I used the wilderness first aid training I'd received through my mountaineering club to make him more comfortable. I offered him water, checked his leg for signs of fracture, and kept him talking to prevent shock from setting in. "I'm Leonard," he said after a while. "Leonard Graham." "Helen," I replied simply, not bothering with my last name. Names seemed trivial on a mountainside as daylight began to fade. At the hospital, I sat quietly in the waiting room as they wheeled him into the ER. I hadn't planned to stay, but something kept me rooted to that uncomfortable plastic chair. Perhaps it was the way he'd grasped my hand just before the paramedics took him away, or perhaps it was simply the human connection I'd been starved of for so long. A while later, a doctor emerged. "He's going to be okay, out of danger." I nodded, relief washing over me for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. I should have left. Then there was nothing more to do, but still I remained. When he finally regained consciousness and I was allowed to see him, I heard his name spoken more formally by the hospital staff, and suddenly everything clicked into place. "Thank you," he said softly from his hospital bed. "I'm Leonard Graham, Executive Director of Graham Group." My heart skipped a beat as the significance registered. The Graham Group, the very firm Colin's company had been desperately trying to secure investment from for months. Colin had mentioned it repeatedly during our sparse phone calls, describing it as the golden ticket that would cement his position at his firm. How interesting. Fate never forgets its timing. "You saved my life," Leonard continued, still weak but gripping my hand with surprising strength. "If there's ever anything you need, anything at all, just ask. Whatever I can do, I will." And I smiled gently and patted the back of his hand. I just happened to be there. Doing the right thing doesn't always need a reward. He spoke with such sincerity that I found myself believing him, though I preferred to keep this unexpected encounter to myself, a quiet twist of fate I'd rather treasure privately. As I rose to leave, I saw the hallway outside his room was already crowded with executives, assistants, and friends, all rushing in to check on him, even lying in that hospital bed. Leonard carried the calm authority of a man used to commanding a room. He wasn't just another patient, he was someone important. "Will you visit again?" he asked, his voice cutting through my thoughts. I hesitated, surprised by the request. "I'm not sure that's necessary." "Please," he said, his eyes meeting mine with unexpected warmth. "I'd like to thank you properly once I'm released. Perhaps dinner." For the first time in a long while, I felt something in my chest loosen, a weight lifted. "Perhaps," I replied, non-committal, yet not refusing. I left my phone number with him, not entirely convinced he would use it. 3 days later, my phone rang. Leonard Graham hadn't forgotten. That was the beginning of what would become a steady presence in my life, a presence I had never anticipated finding on that mountain trail. In the weeks that followed, as Colin's professional life began unraveling in ways he couldn't understand, Leonard and I formed a connection built on mutual respect rather than obligation. He never knew about Colin, about the hiking accident, about any of it. I kept those worlds carefully separated, like oil and water that should never mix. Leonard was nothing like the men I had known. He didn't demand or take. He offered and asked. Our conversations flowed easily, spanning books and travel and quiet philosophies developed over decades of living. He listened when I spoke, as though my thoughts carried genuine weight. I realized with some surprise, how equals treated one another. One afternoon, as we sat in a small cafe near my home, Leonard reached across the table and took my hand. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "meeting you was the strangest stroke of good fortune. If I hadn't fallen that day." I smiled, thinking of all the hidden mechanisms of fate that had led to that moment on the mountain. Life has a peculiar way of arranging things, doesn't it? He nodded, his thumb gently tracing circles on my palm. I've spent my whole life analyzing risks, calculating outcomes, planning for contingencies. And yet the best thing that's happened to me in years came from a complete accident. And I thought about Colin then, about how his attempt to harm me had inadvertently opened a door to something genuine and warm. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to end my life, my son had unwittingly given me a reason to truly start living it. "Sometimes," I said softly, "we find exactly what we need in the most unexpected places." And as Leonard smiled back at me, I knew that this chance encounter, this fateful meeting on a mountainside, had changed everything. Sometimes life's most meaningful turns come disguised as accidents. And sometimes salvation arrives when we least expect it, wearing the face of a stranger who won't remain a stranger for long. "All the paperwork is ready," I said evenly, smiling as I handed Colin a document carefully disguised as a house transfer agreement. "Consider it a gift to your little family." Colin's eyes lit up instantly. He snatched the papers from my hand like a man who'd just hit the lottery, his voice brimming with poorly concealed excitement. The noise brought Vanessa down from upstairs, her face glowing with barely disguised delight as she leaned in to scan the document quickly, her smile stretching wider by the second. But when she reached the final page, her expression faltered just slightly, a flicker of suspicion passing through her narrowed eyes. Then she dropped onto the couch, crossed her legs, and assumed the posture of a woman fully in control. "Well then, I guess this house is ours now," she declared with cold satisfaction. "So when are you moving out?" Just as I expected, I blinked in feigned surprise. "Move out? Where would I even go?" Vanessa shrugged, her voice colder than ever, brushing away any pretense of familial obligation. "That's your problem, not ours. We're not responsible for where you live." I turned to Colin, my eyes filled with a calculated plea. "I really don't have anywhere to go. Couldn't I stay here, just for a while?" He looked away, avoiding my gaze. "There are plenty of rentals out there. Just find a place." But I couldn't leave. Not yet, not until everything was in place. I gently took his arm, my voice soft and deliberately subdued. "I've been taking care of you so well here. I can keep cooking, cleaning. I won't be any trouble." Vanessa frowned, clearly weighing the pros and cons, then gave a casual nod. "Fine, let her stay for now. At least she's useful." In that moment, she already saw herself as the mistress of the house. Colin, seeing her agree, didn't bother to argue. "Yeah, whatever. Stay." I lowered my head, hiding the smile that curled at the corner of my lips. The more relaxed they became, the easier it would be to expose them. Truth was, I'd seen through them long ago, ever since the wedding preparations, when Colin drained every cent I had to fulfill Vanessa's extravagant demands, the overpriced ceremony, the luxury car, the down payment for their apartment. I paid for it all, and now here I was again, back in my own home, playing the part of an unpaid housemate. From that day on, Vanessa no longer hid her sense of entitlement. "Bring me some water," she barked one afternoon, slamming her palm on the table like she was calling over a servant. "Seriously, you're getting worse at this." I forced a tight smile and brought her the water. She took one sip, then immediately spat it out, splashing me in the process. Are you trying to burn me alive? Me and the baby? The fury that surged in me almost shattered my composure, but I managed a thin smile. Sorry, I'll get you another one. Jan, and she clicked her tongue in annoyance and waved me off. Forget it, go grocery shopping. Make something decent for dinner. I nodded, picked up the grocery bags, and stepped out the door. But the moment I crossed that threshold, a plan had already formed in my mind. What Colin and Vanessa didn't realize was that the document they thought transferred ownership of my house was nothing more than an elaborately designed fake, a non-binding property transfer intent form. As stated in the fine print on the last page, in their eagerness to claim my property, they hadn't bothered to read it carefully. The house remained legally mine, while they believed they had successfully manipulated me out of my home. Their overconfidence made them careless, and their greed blinded them to the deception right before their eyes. Each day, I played along with their performance, allowing them to believe they had won, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. That moment came weeks later, after I had sent them on a lavish vacation to Thailand, one that they eagerly accepted, spending tens of thousands of dollars that I generously provided. While they were gone, I methodically cleared out every trace of their existence from my home, changed the locks, and prepared for the final act of my plan. When they returned, drunk on luxury and excess, I sent them the bill, every extravagant dinner, every designer purchase, all charged to Colin's own credit line that I had pushed past its limit. The money they thought was mine to give had merely been advanced through his name, following his own pattern of reckless spending. Their calls came immediately, filled with panic and fury. What the hell is this? What are these bills you sent me? Colin demanded. The money you spent. Colin, it's yours to repay. I replied calmly. I'm your son. Isn't it normal for me to spend your money? He erupted, indignation dripping from every word. I let out a soft chuckle. Really? You still remember I'm your mother? Tell me, aside from when you needed money, have you ever looked me in the eyes and said, I love you, Mom? When they arrived at my doorstep, pounding furiously, I opened it just enough to block the entrance with my body. Colin immediately tried to force his way in. Excuse me, what do you think you're doing? This isn't your house, Pete, I said firmly. His eyes blazed. What do you mean you gave us this house? Vanessa sneered, arms crossed. Don't act high and mighty. We let you stay here out of kindness. I laughed coldly and tossed a folder straight into Colin's face. Take a look. Whose name is on the deed? Colin opened the folder, his face going pale as he read. This can't be. Vanessa snatched it from his hands, flipping through the pages until her fingers trembled. It still says your name. You tricked us. I raised an eyebrow. You were in such a rush to collect your inheritance, you didn't even read the fine print. That document you signed, just a non-binding property transfer intent form, not legally valid. Her face turned ashen. Why would you give us a fake contract? I smiled faintly. Because you were too busy celebrating to notice the last line, for display purposes only, not a legally binding transfer of ownership. In their greed and arrogance, they had fallen into the trap they themselves had set. The predators had become the prey, and the woman they thought they could so easily discard had outsmarted them at their own game. Sometimes, the most perfect deception is the one that uses a person's own nature against them. Colin and Vanessa were so eager to believe they had won, so convinced of their own cleverness, that they never stopped to verify what was right in front of them. And in that blind spot created by their avarice, I found the perfect place to hide the truth in plain sight, where they would never think to look. Colin lost control, shoving me hard against the doorframe. "I'm your son. How could you do this to me?" I steadied myself, then calmly reached into a drawer beside the entryway. The envelope I pulled out looked ordinary, but its contents would shatter the foundation of his identity forever. "You're not my son," I said quietly, watching the color drain from his face completely. I handed him the envelope with a steady hand. "This is a paternity test report. Your biological mother was the woman who broke up my marriage. She had you, then vanished. Your pathetic father was kicked out of my life for it." His hands trembled as he took the envelope, his eyes wide with disbelief. "But I took you in," I continued, my voice level despite the decades of buried truth finally emerging. "I raised you. I gave you a home, a name, an education. I paid your debts, bought you a house, gave you a family." My voice caught slightly as I delivered the final blow. "I never had another child because I gave everything to you. And what did you give me in return?" Colin sank to the floor like his spine had snapped, muttering under his breath, No, you're lying. This can't be real." I crouched down, looked him in the eyes, and said quietly, "I've already done more than enough for you. Now pay back what you owe and get out of my house." The revelation hit him like physical force. This man who had plotted my death, who had disposed of my beloved dog without remorse, who had seen me as nothing but a resource to be drained, he was not of my blood. And yet I had given him everything a mother could give, had loved him as my own, despite knowing the painful truth of his origins. It was a secret I had guarded for decades, watching him grow under my care, hoping that nurture would overcome nature, that my love would somehow transform this child born of betrayal into someone capable of genuine feeling. I had been wrong. That night, 30 years ago, came flooding back with crystal clarity. I had returned home early from a business trip, walking into my bedroom to find my husband with another woman, his secretary, pregnant with his child. The confrontation that followed left me alone in an empty house, my marriage shattered beyond repair. 2 months later, she abandoned the baby, left him on our doorstep with nothing but a hastily scribbled note. My ex-husband, unable to cope with the responsibility, begged me to help. Despite the wounds still fresh in my heart, I couldn't bear to see an innocent child suffer for the sins of his parents. I took Colin in, legally adopted him, gave him my name. I never told him the truth. I wanted him to feel secure, wanted, loved. I thought if I poured enough love into him, if I sacrificed enough for him, he would somehow absorb those qualities and reflect them back. For years, I convinced myself that the coldness I occasionally glimpsed in him was just a phase, that his tendency toward selfishness was normal childhood behavior he would outgrow. But as he matured, these qualities only deepened. When he threw the scalding soup in my face during his gambling intervention, I saw a flash of his biological mother's temperament, the same cold rage I'd witnessed that night decades ago. Still, I persisted in my delusion that love could heal anything, even the absence of empathy. Standing before him now, watching my revelation shatter his world, I felt no satisfaction, only the weight of 30 years of misplaced hope finally lifting from my shoulders. Perhaps I had done him no favors by hiding the truth. Perhaps knowing his origins earlier might have helped him understand himself better, might have allowed him to seek help for the emptiness I now recognized had always been there. Vanessa stood frozen in the hallway, her expression cycling through shock, confusion, and calculation. I could almost see the gears turning behind her eyes as she reassessed her relationship with Colin in light of this new information. Was he still valuable to her without the inheritance she'd anticipated, without the family connections she'd married into? Is this why she began, then stopped herself, recalibrating her approach? Helen, surely we can discuss this like family. Family, I echoed, the word hollow in my mouth. You were never interested in family. Vanessa, only in what you could take from it. I turned back to Colin, who remained crumpled on the floor, the paternity test clutched in his shaking hands. I gave you everything a mother could give, and more. I chose you. Colin, I chose to be your mother when your biological parents abandoned you. That should have meant something. But, he stuttered, his voice small and broken, all this time, you knew. Why tell me now? Because you left me no choice. I replied softly. Because you were willing to take my life for money. Because nothing I ever did was enough to make you capable of gratitude or love. Keying, the truth hung in the air between us, heavy and irreversible. I had raised him as my son, but he had never truly been mine, not in blood, and as it turned out, not in spirit either. What happens now, he asked, vulnerability briefly replacing the entitlement that had defined our relationship for so long. I looked at him, this stranger I had raised, and felt the last threads of maternal attachment finally dissolve. Now you leave. You build your own life without using me as your safety net. You learn what it means to stand on your own feet. As I closed the door behind them, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sense of having finally put down a burden I had carried far too long. Blood may not have bound us, but I had given him 30 years of my life, my heart, my resources, and in the end, it hadn't been enough to create the connection I had so desperately wanted. Some bonds cannot be forced, no matter how much love we pour into them. Some people cannot receive love, no matter how generously it's given. In accepting this truth, I found not bitterness, but freedom. Freedom to finally live for myself after decades of living for someone who had never truly seen me at all. From the day Colin and Vanessa moved into my home, I began crafting a different kind of plan, one that would unfold slowly, methodically, with effects they wouldn't notice until it was far too late. My weapon of choice, food. The very meals they eagerly devoured, thinking they were using me as their personal chef, were actually the first phase of my calculated retribution. I drove to the store calmly, selecting ingredients while assembling my version of a revenge menu. This wouldn't involve cheap tricks like greasy fast food or sugar-laden desserts that was too obvious, too easily traced back. No, I'd serve them something far more subtle, far more effective. I filled my cart with comfort food, high-calorie, addictive, deceptively indulgent dishes, creamy mashed potatoes loaded with butter, baked macaroni and cheese with extra cheese, duck confit, sweet pumpkin soup enriched with heavy cream, everything they loved, everything that sounded hearty and nourishing but would slowly weigh them down, fog their minds, dull their bodies. That night, I laid out a full spread. Colin devoured the cheesy casseroles and risotto like a starved animal, chuckling between mouthfuls. "Mom, your cooking's better than ever," he said, reaching for seconds. Vanessa sipped the thick, oily pumpkin cream soup I had deliberately made extra rich, a pleased smile on her face. "Looks like keeping you around was a smart move after all," she remarked with the casual cruelty that had become her hallmark. "Eat as much as you like," I said sweetly, pushing more food toward them. "You both look like you've lost a little weight lately." I watched them gorge themselves, suppressing the grim smile rising in my chest. They didn't notice a thing, not the trap slowly closing around them, not the fatigue that would soon creep in, not the fog that would begin to cloud their judgment. And I simply kept cooking. The next day, the day after that, I followed the same pattern, meal after meal, each more indulgent than the last. Breakfast featured buttered toast with thick layers of homemade jam, eggs swimming in hollandaise sauce, sausages glistening with fat. Lunch brought creamy pasta dishes, rich soups, and freshly baked bread slathered with herb butter. Dinner was an event, multiple courses of comfort foods, heavy gravies, decadent desserts. The more they ate, the calmer I felt. Every bite brought me one step closer to justice. This wasn't about poisoning them. I would never stoop to something so crude. This was about conditioning their bodies in ways they wouldn't recognize until the damage was done. High sodium content to increase water retention and raise blood pressure. Excessive sugars to create energy crashes and dependency. Trans fats to clog their systems. Each ingredient carefully chosen for maximum long-term impact with minimum suspicion. Within weeks, I began to see the changes. Colin's face grew puffy, his breathing slightly labored as he climbed the stairs. Vanessa's complexion, once the focus of her vanity, became dull and blemished. Their energy levels plummeted. They slept longer, moved slower, thought less clearly. Still, they attributed these changes to stress, to the weather, to anything but the meals they eagerly anticipated 3 times a day. "Helen, I'm craving your chicken Alfredo tonight," Vanessa would command, her voice still imperious despite the fatigue evident in her eyes. Of course, I would respond with placid obedience, and perhaps chocolate lava cake for dessert. Her eyes would light up, greed overriding any sense of moderation. Perfect. During their hospital stay after the mountain incident, Vanessa didn't miss a beat in returning to her usual self. "I'm craving Boston lobster today. Tomorrow I want abalone soup. I need to nourish my body," she demanded, as though her time on the mountain had earned her even more indulgence. Once, I would have gently reminded her to eat light foods after trauma, to give her body time to recover, but not now. I simply smiled, nodded, and went to the kitchen. I prepared everything just the way she liked, rich, heavy, excessive, and added a special chicken soup every day, never missing a serving. She drank it down with satisfaction, and I watched quietly, content. The soup contained nothing harmful, no poisons, no medications, just concentrated chicken fat, excessive sodium, and a carefully calibrated mix of ingredients designed to tax an already stressed system. I was playing the long game, one meal at a time. By the time they were discharged from the hospital, the cumulative effects of months of this dietary sabotage had begun to take serious hold. Their bodies, weakened by the mountain ordeal and already compromised by the food regime I had subjected them to, struggled to recover. Where a healthy person might have bounced back quickly, they remained fragile, their systems fighting a battle on multiple fronts. When they collapsed on my doorstep weeks later, faces pale and consciousness fading, I called 911 without hesitation. I had no desire to see them dead, only diminished, weakened, experiencing a fraction of the helplessness they had intended for me. The doctor later told me they might never fully recover. Years of indulgent, high-fat, high-sodium, high-sugar meals, combined with their emotional unraveling and stress overload, have finally caught up with them. He explained clinically. Weakness will likely be their new normal. I gave a small smile. That's no concern of mine. As I left the hospital room, Colin managed to whisper one faint sentence. "Mom, I'm sorry." I paused, turning just slightly. "You're right," I said softly. "You should be sorry for being a thankless parasite." I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard the sharp beeping of the monitor. A flurry of nurses rushed into the room. I stood outside, watching the chaos unfold behind the glass, nothing more than an observer to a story I no longer belonged to. There is poetic justice in using food, the most fundamental expression of nurturing and care, as an instrument of retribution. I had fed Colin his entire life, sustained him, nourished him with the fruits of my labor and love. How fitting that in the end, it was also food that brought about his downfall, not through dramatic poisoning or obvious harm, but through the slow, inexorable accumulation of excess, much like the way his greed and entitlement had accumulated over decades until they consumed whatever humanity he might once have possessed. Sometimes, the most effective revenge doesn't announce itself with thunder and lightning. Sometimes, it simply arrives meal by meal, bite by bite, until one day, the body itself becomes the prison that no key can unlock. My phone rang, a familiar name lighting up the screen. "Where are you? I'm coming to pick you up." The moment I heard Leonard's voice, something in my chest, tight and bruised for so long, finally softened. I drew in a long breath, wiped away the remnants of emotion from the corners of my eyes, and walked toward the hospital entrance. Soon, a dark sedan pulled up quietly in front of me. I raised a hand and smiled. "Long time no see." Leonard smiled back from behind the wheel. "It's been too long. Think it's time we finally take each other seriously." I didn't answer right away. I simply opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. Leonard was the kind of man who radiated calm the moment you were near him. Not loud, not overbearing. He never tried to take center stage in my life, but he was always the one holding the light when I felt most lost. In the days that followed, I began to grow used to his presence. He took me to small-town book clubs, encouraged me to join a pottery class at the local art center. We walked together in the mornings and cooked in the afternoons. He listened when I talked about Goofy, and he let me share the darker memories when they surfaced. I began redecorating the house, stripping away all remnants of a life I once arranged for someone else, replacing it with my own tastes and joy. The kitchen, once a battleground of obligation, became a place of peace where I now cooked only for myself. In the backyard, I planted an herb garden mint, rosemary, lavender. They thrived under the sun, just like my spirit had begun to. Leonard never made grand promises. He didn't talk of forever. He simply stayed quietly, steadily living beside me, not for me. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch with tea in hand, and he'd gently take my fingers and say, "Helen, you finally stopped living for everyone else." I'd smile and nod. Yes, I was finally living for me. Friends, the most powerful lesson I've learned through life's hardest challenges is this: true happiness begins the moment you stop sacrificing your own peace for people who would never do the same for you. We are taught that love means endless giving, that family bonds require unlimited sacrifice. But sometimes, the bravest act of self-love is recognizing when to walk away from relationships that only take and never give back. For 60 years, I lived for others, pouring my heart, my resources, my very soul into people who saw me only as a means to their own ends. I mistook self-sacrifice for virtue, depletion for devotion, but real love should never leave you empty. Real connection nourishes both people, not just one. Your worth isn't measured by how much pain you can endure or how long you can sustain one-sided relationships. Sometimes the universe removes people from your life, not as a punishment, but as a gift, making room for connections that reflect your true value, like Leonard did for me. If you're holding on to toxic relationships out of obligation or fear, I hope my story gives you courage. It's never too late to begin again. At 60, I found the strength to rebuild. You can too. Have you ever had to walk away from a relationship that was draining your spirit? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you want more stories of resilience, redemption, and finding joy after pain, subscribe to our channel. Remember, the best chapter of your life may still be waiting to be written, regardless of your age or past struggles. The choice to begin anew is always yours to make.